Hey guys, this is Zach with 80/20 Media, here today with a video on the best and worst years for the Ford F-150. The F-150 has been in production since 1948, so obviously the F-150 has been around for a long time, and covering every single one of the years and generations of the F-150 would be nearly impossible in this video, especially since the F-150 is currently on its 14th generation. So here we're narrowing this down, starting with the 10th generation F-150, which made its debut in 1997. So essentially looking at the best and worst years for the F-150 from 1997 through the present day. Jumping right in, looking at the 10th generation F-150, again made its debut in 1997, and that remained through model year 2004. It featured the 4.2 V6 as well as the 4.6 V8 Triton and the 5.4 Triton and the 5.4 Triton supercharged version, which was found in the F-150 SVT Lightning. So a couple different engine options there, but ultimately for these early years and in that 10th generation F-150, all of these engines are pretty reliable overall. And these trucks in general are reliable. Now, one thing to mention, the 4.6 and 5.4 Triton in the 10th gen F-150 do use the 2-valve Triton engines, which had a number of issues with spark plug blowouts. So that was a little bit of a problem for those 10th gen trucks with the V8 engines back then, but a fairly small issue in the grand scheme of things. And really outside of that, otherwise the chassis itself, the actual truck itself, was pretty reliable, had very few serious issues, and same thing goes for those engines, nothing major. So ultimately 10th gen from 1997 through 2004, mostly good trucks all around. Moving on to the 11th generation from 2004 until 2008. This is where things take a pretty severe turn for the worse. This 11th gen F-150 does use the same 4.2 liter V6, as well as the same 2-valve 4.6 liter V8 Triton engine. However, in the case of the 5.4 Triton, Ford had moved from the 2-valve engine to a 3-valve version of the 5.4, and that engine was fairly problematic overall. The introduction of variable valve timing came along with a couple issues. 2004 to 2008 trucks, again, despite the other two engines still being fairly reliable, suffered a lot of transmission problems. Window regulators were an issue on those trucks, and overall that 5.4 Triton, the 3-valve version, is just not a very reliable engine. So the 11th gen from 2004 to 2008, for the most part, are not the most reliable F-150s around, and probably some years to avoid there. Moving on to the 12th generation, things took a turn for the better here. 12th generation F-150 was available for model years 2009 to 2014. So again, the same 4.6 Triton 2-valve as well as the addition of the 3-valve. It also still had in the first couple years the 5.4 3-valve Triton engine, as well as a 3.7 liter V6 engine option. In 2011, Ford introduced the 3.5 EcoBoost and the 5.0 Coyote, as well as the 6.2 Boss V8 found in the Raptor. Ultimately, for 2009 to 2014, these 12th gen F-150s, all pretty good engine options, again, except for that 3-valve 5.4 Triton, which was in those 09 and 2010 models as an engine option. One good engine to potentially avoid for those early 12th gen F-150s. Otherwise, all great engines. We're huge fans of the 3.5 EcoBoost as well as the 5.0 Coyote, and the 6.2 Boss in the Raptor is also a great engine if you're looking for a sportier and quicker truck like the Raptor. However, 2010 and 2011 model years specifically had quite a few complaints and issues with the transmission and transmission shifting, as well as the infotainment system and touchscreen. That's really one of the biggest complaints of those 2010 and 2011 trucks, was that infotainment system. There were a lot of known issues and little weird things that would happen with it, like the backup camera wouldn't show at all, the touchscreen was just tough to navigate and wasn't very user-friendly, and then a number of these trucks, despite some good engine options, also suffered an unusual amount of oil leaks. For this 12th gen F-150 from 2009 to 2014, avoid that 5.4 Triton in the early years and potentially avoid 2010 and 2011 due to a couple known issues with those. Moving on to the next generation of the F-150, we have the 13th gen Ford F-150, and that was available for model years 2015 up until 2020. It has quite a few engine options during that 13th gen. So there are the 3.3 and 3.5 liter V6 Cyclone engines. There was still the 3.5 EcoBoost from the previous generation. Ford also introduced the 2.7 liter twin turbocharged V6 EcoBoost. There's also the 5.0 Coyote carried over from the previous gen, as well as a new 3-liter Power Stroke diesel offering for the F-150. So quite a few offerings there. Ultimately, all of these engines are pretty solid engines overall. Each of them are prone to their share of a couple issues here and there, and that can be said for just about any engine in the world and any of these Ford engines that we're discussing in this video. But ultimately, all solid engines. However, there was one main issue with the 2015 to 2017 trucks, and that was more transmission problems for those years. Complaints about transmission failures, as well as just transmission shifting issues. The 2015 to 2017 models also ran into a lot of brake failures and brake problems, and then some door mechanical issues that were a little bit of a headache. So ultimately, 2015 to 2017, the chassis were plagued with a number of different options, including those transmission problems. And that's despite the fact that, again, all of these engines in the 13th gen F-150 are pretty solid engines and nothing that should steer you away from any of them specifically. Moving on to the current generation, the 14th generation Ford F-150. That is available for model years 2021 through the present day. It has the 3.3 Cyclone, the 2.7 and 3.5 EcoBoost, the 5.0 Coyote, the 3.5 Power Boost, and also the 3.0 Power Stroke. So more or less the same engine options from the 13th generation F-150. And once again, all great engines all around, prone to their share of issues here and there, just as with any engine. Otherwise, these trucks are still new, so maybe more issues will pop up down the road, but as of right now, they seem to be great trucks, so not really much to say with the 14th gen. Of course, if you are looking at the 14th gen, we're talking about 2021 plus models, so you're still going to have warranty unless it's already a very high mileage example. You're still going to have factory warranty. And of course, just with newer trucks or newer cars in general, they're going to be less prone to having age-related issues like oil leaks and coolant leaks and various gaskets and seals and O-rings failing and degrading over time. So of course, these newer trucks are going to be the most reliable if that is in the budget. Anyway, that wraps it up moving through all of the generations. So just to summarize everything here and tie it all together for the best and worst years of the F-150, since 1997, the best years of the F-150 are the late 90s and early 2000s, so really that 10th generation, anything from 1997 to 2003 are all great trucks for the most part. 2012 to 2014 are great options, and then again, the 2018 plus F-150s are all great choices as well. And some of those years to avoid, as we discussed with that 11th generation F-150 from 2004 to 2008, really most of those years are best to avoid just due to the number of engine problems as well as some chassis problems. However, it was mostly the 2004 and 2005 that were the worst hit, especially when it comes to issues with the truck and the chassis itself. So a little bit better for the later 11th gen F-150s, but ultimately if you're looking for a reliable truck, it's probably best to avoid that 04 to 08 range, as well as 2010 to 2012, and then 2015 to 2017, due to some transmission problems, infotainment system issues, and various other problems on those model years. Looking at engines here, probably the biggest engine to avoid in the F-150 is that 5.4 Triton 3-valve engine. The rest of these engines that we discussed in this video in the F-150 are all pretty solid options. In terms of the best ones, it's hard to say for sure. We're big fans of the EcoBoost engines, so both the 2.7 and 3.5 EcoBoost and also the 5.0 Coyote are all, in our opinion, exceptional engines and great choices, prone to their share of issues, but for the most part, very unproblematic engines and very reliable, and all offer great towing capacity. So certainly great engine options in the 5.0 Coyote and the EcoBoost engine options. A couple other considerations here. I kind of briefly touched on the fact that newer trucks are going to be more reliable. Even though we're saying 97 to 03 are some of the most reliable and some of the best years for the F-150, keep in mind at this point that is a roughly 25-year-old truck we're talking about. And so, of course, there's going to be some extra TLC required. With that kind of age and likely mileage on those older trucks, there are going to be things like gaskets, O-ring, seals, coolant hoses, various rubber and plastic pieces that just degrade and break down over time. So despite them being great for their era, they are going to be a little bit more problematic nowadays. And then, of course, all of this isn't anything that's set in stone. There are going to be cases of 2005 F-150s being more reliable than a 2013 F-150. And so even some of the best years compared to some of the worst years, there are outliers mixed in there. So that's not to say that this is a definitive guide and that this is all just how it works. Some of it comes down to how well was a truck maintained in the past, what was it used for, and then there's a little bit of the luck of the draw involved as well, just in terms of whether or not you actually get a good F-150. But ultimately, that wraps up our video on the best and worst years for the Ford F-150. If you guys like this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and check out the description down below for more awesome content on the F-150. Thanks, guys.